My husband never missed a single one of our son's checkups. Not one. In 7 years, he had taken Connor to every pediatric appointment, every booster shot, every sick visit, alone. And I had let him. That's the part I keep coming back to. I let him. When we first got together, I thought it was sweet. He was so involved, so hands-on. Most of the dads I'd grown up around barely knew their kids' pediatricians' names, and he was my husband, tall, steady, reliable, scheduling appointments himself, keeping a little folder of immunization records in his desk drawer like it was a sacred document. I used to brag about him at my sister's kitchen table. He does everything, I would say. He's just that kind of dad. I didn't understand, back then, that he does everything can also mean he makes sure you do nothing. His name was Nathan. We met when I was 26, at a work conference in Denver. I was in marketing, he was in pharmaceutical sales, which meant he knew how to talk, smooth and warm and absolutely certain of himself in a way that I found intoxicating at the time and now recognize as something else entirely. We dated for 18 months, got married in the small ceremony at his parents' lake house in Minnesota, and had Connor 11 months later. I was 29. I thought my life had assembled itself perfectly. The first time Nathan took Connor to the pediatrician alone, Connor was 3 weeks old, and I had a low-grade fever. Nathan insisted, "You need to rest. I've got it. I'll tell you everything." He did tell me everything, the weight, the measurements, the doctor's notes about Connor's latch. He even came home with a printed summary sheet. I thought, this man is extraordinary. The second time I was in a client meeting I couldn't leave. Nathan handled it. The third time I had a bad migraine. By the fourth time it had quietly become the arrangement. Nathan took Connor to the doctor. That was just the way it was. If I ever suggested coming along, Nathan had a reason why it didn't make sense. It's just a routine visit, you'd be bored. Or, the parking there is a nightmare, no reason for both of us to deal with it. Or, the one he used most often, delivered with a half smile that made me feel slightly foolish for asking, "Babe, I have a relationship with Dr. Ellison. He talks to me differently because he knows I understand the medical side. You'd just end up confused." I believed him. That's why I have to sit with. I believed him for 6 years. It was a Tuesday in late October when everything changed. Nathan was in Phoenix for a sales conference 4 days, which was normal for his job. Connor had woken up with a cough that rattled in his chest in a way I didn't like. Not dramatic, not an emergency, but the kind of cough that makes a mother's stomach drop slightly, that specific hollow sound. I called Dr. Ellison's office. The receptionist said they had a 2 p.m. slot. I remember standing in the kitchen, Connor at the table eating crackers and thinking I should call Nathan and let him know. Then I thought, why? He was in a conference. I was Connor's mother. I was perfectly capable of taking my own child to the doctor. So I did. Dr. Ellison was a small, careful man in his late 50s with reading glasses perpetually pushed up on his forehead. He had been Connor's pediatrician since birth. In all that time, I had met him exactly once at Connor's newborn appointment, which Nathan had also attended. He walked in, looked at Connor, looked at me, and then looked at his tablet in a way that was slightly too deliberate to be natural. "It's good to finally see you in, Mrs. Whitfield," he said. Finally. I noticed the word but didn't pull on it yet. The visit was routine. Connor had mild bronchitis, nothing serious, a round of amoxicillin and some rest. Dr. Ellison was kind and thorough, and Connor liked him immediately. I was just beginning to relax when Dr. Ellison asked Connor if he wanted to pick a sticker from the basket by the door, and then turned to me. "Would you mind stepping into my office for a moment?" I felt the shift in the room. The way his voice had changed, professional, careful, the tone of someone who has rehearsed what they're about to say. "Of course," I said. His office was small and lined with the kind of framed children's drawings that pediatricians accumulate over decades. He sat down across from me and folded his hands. "I want to ask you something directly," he said, "and I hope you'll understand it comes from a place of concern. Over the past 2 years, Connor has been brought in for a significant number of blood draws and additional screenings that fall outside our standard well-child protocol." I didn't understand what he was saying. What kind of screenings? He looked at me carefully. HLA typing, tissue compatibility panels. The kind of workup we typically only run when we're trying to determine whether a patient might be a viable donor match for someone else. The room went very quiet. Nathan brought him in for those. Every time, Dr. Ellison said. I want to be honest with you. I had concerns. I asked Nathan about the necessity on 2 occasions. He told me it was for a research study he was affiliated with through his company. I accepted that explanation, perhaps longer than I should have. But when I saw that you were here today without him and that you seemed, he paused, choosing the word, unaware of the extent of Connor's testing history, I felt I couldn't let you leave without saying something. I sat in that chair for what felt like a very long time. Who would need a donor match? I finally asked. Who were they testing Connor against? Dr. Ellison opened his hand slightly. I don't know. That information was never shared with me. I only know what tests were run and that the results were forwarded to an external specialist, a Dr. Z. Hargrove at a clinic in Scottsdale. Scottsdale. Nathan had been in Scottsdale 4 times in the past year. I had assumed it was work. I drove home in a kind of suspended state. Connor fell asleep in the back seat almost immediately, his little chest rising and falling, the antibiotics prescription folded in my purse. I kept both hands on the wheel, and kept my breathing even, and did not let myself think too far ahead. Because if I thought too far ahead, I was going to have to pull over. When I got home, I put Connor down for a nap. Then I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I did not know exactly what I was looking for. I started with Dr. Hargrove, Scottsdale. The clinic came up immediately, a specialty centre for paediatric hematology and transplant medicine. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I went looking through the things I had never thought to look through before. Nathan kept a home office. I had always respected the boundary of it in the way you do when someone establishes a space as theirs, and you have no reason to question it. But I walked in there that afternoon, and I opened drawers. In the second drawer of his filing cabinet, behind a folder of tax documents, there was an envelope. Inside the envelope were 3 things: a printed email chain, a photograph, and a document from a family law attorney in Scottsdale dated 14 months ago. The photograph was of a little boy. He was maybe 5 years old. Dark hair, Nathan's jaw, a gap-toothed smile. On the back, written in handwriting I didn't recognize, Miles, 5 years old. July. The email chain was between Nathan and a woman named Gwen. It went back 3 years. I didn't read all of it. I couldn't, not then, but I read enough. Gwen had a son. The son was Nathan's. The son had been diagnosed 18 months ago with a rare bone marrow condition. He needed a transplant. Half-siblings were often the closest available matches. Connor was a half-sibling. Nathan had never told me any of this. The legal document was even worse. It was a consultation memo from the Scottsdale attorney, an outline of Nathan's options, in the event that the marital spouse declines to consent to the minor child's participation in the donation procedure. One of the options listed was petitioning for sole medical decision-making authority on the basis of the other parent's emotional instability. He had already consulted a lawyer about how to override me before he had ever told me the truth, before he had ever given me the chance to say yes or no. I sat on the floor of his office for a long time. I need you to understand something about the next 72 hours, because people always asked me why I didn't just call him immediately, why I didn't confront him right away, why I waited. The answer is that I was very, very scared. Not of Nathan physically. He had never been that kind of person, but I was scared of how smart he was. I was scared that if I called him and he heard in my voice that I knew, he would have a plan in place before his flight landed. He was a pharmaceutical sales rep. He was the best talker I had ever met. And there was a legal memo in my hands that told me he had already started preparing. So I called my sister first. My sister had never liked Nathan. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way she'd ever pushed on me. She'd just always had a flatness in her voice when she talked about him, a particular kind of careful politeness that I now understood was restraint. When I called her, I didn't say hello. I just said, I need you to come over right now, and I need you to not ask me questions until you're here. She was there in 40 minutes. I showed her everything. She sat very still while she read, which is how I knew it was as bad as I thought. You need a lawyer before he comes home, she said. She was right. I called an attorney that same night, a family law attorney a colleague had once used in a messy divorce. I explained the situation in a flat voice that surprised even me, and she said, "Don't confront him. Don't let him know what you know. Get me copies of everything first." Over the next 2 days, I photographed every document in that drawer. I called Dr. Ellison's office and asked for a copy of Connor's full medical records, which I was legally entitled to, as his mother, despite never having been given them before. The receptionist seemed almost relieved when I asked. I also found the iPad. It was an older model, tucked behind a box of cables in the top shelf of the closet we shared, the kind of thing you stop noticing after a while. I charged it, and it opened without a passcode. Nathan had apparently forgotten he'd left himself logged in. There were text messages between him and Gwen. There were messages between him and Dr. Hargrove. There was a message from Dr. Hargrove that said, "The typing results confirm C is a strong match. We can move forward with scheduling once you have resolved the consent issue." Resolved the consent issue. That was me. I was the consent issue. There was also a message from Nathan to Gwen, sent 8 months ago. "She doesn't ask questions. She never has. We'll have what we need within the year." I read that message 4 times. I needed to understand it completely. I needed to make sure I was reading it correctly and not constructing something out of my own fear. She doesn't ask questions. She never has. He was right. I hadn't. Nathan came home on a Thursday evening. He dropped his suitcase in the entryway, kissed me on the cheek, ruffled Connor's hair, and asked what was for dinner. He seemed relaxed, unbothered. He told a story about a dinner he'd had in Phoenix with his regional manager. I listened and nodded and put plates on the table and felt like I was operating my own body by remote control. After Connor was in bed, my attorney had advised me to get him to say as much as possible, calmly, without confrontation, in a setting where I could later recall the details clearly. She had also advised me to have my phone recording in my pocket. I waited until we were both sitting with decaf coffee at the kitchen table, the easy domestic quiet of it, and I said as naturally as I could, "Connor had a little cough while you were gone. I took him to see Dr. Ellison." The pause was almost imperceptible. Almost. "Oh yeah." He kept his voice easy. "Everything okay? Bronchitis. Nothing serious." I watched his face. Dr. Ellison was thorough. He went through Connor's whole file. Another pause. Longer this time. Nathan set down his coffee mug. "What do you mean?" "All the blood work," I said. "The tissue panels. The HLA typing." He walked me through all of it. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than any we had ever had in that kitchen. I watched him process, watched the calculations happening behind his eyes, the rapid assessment of how much I knew and what position he was now in. "I can explain that," he said. "I know you can," I said. "You're very good at explaining things." He started with the version I imagine he'd had rehearsed, the research study, the pharmaceutical trial, routine additional monitoring. He was smooth. He was convincing. If I hadn't had that drawer and that iPad and 2 days to prepare myself, I might have believed him. "Nathan," I said quietly, "I found the photograph of Miles." The rehearsed version stopped. What followed was not a confession so much as a slow deflation, a man who'd been holding something very large and heavy, gradually setting it down. He told me about Gwen, he told me about Miles. He told me about the diagnosis, the bone marrow condition, the desperate narrowing of options that a parent faces when their child is sick, and the medical system has run out of clean answers. He told me that he hadn't known how to tell me, that he hadn't wanted to hurt me, that he had convinced himself he could handle it quietly, that if Connor was a match and the procedure went smoothly, no one would ever need to know. "He's 7 years old," Nathan said. His voice broke for the first time. "He's 7 years old, and he's running out of time." I believed that part. I believed he was a father who was terrified. I believed that Miles was a real child who was genuinely sick, and that somewhere in Nathan there was a man who had panicked and made catastrophically wrong choices out of something that was, at its root, love. But then I said, "I saw the legal memo, Nathan, the one about petitioning for sole medical authority, about my emotional instability, and the thing that broke something in me forever was that he didn't look ashamed. He looked, for just a moment, caught, like someone who'd made a tactical error. That was just a contingency, he said. A contingency, I repeated. I wasn't going to. You were planning for a version of this where you took Connor's medical decisions away from me before I ever found out he had a brother. My voice was very calm. I surprised myself with how calm it was. That's not a contingency, that's a plan. I will try to tell the rest of this as clearly as I can because people deserve to know how these things actually work, not just the dramatic parts. My attorney filed for divorce the following week. She also filed an emergency motion regarding Connor's medical decisions, establishing on record that I had not consented to any of the testing Connor had undergone and requesting that a guardian ad litem be appointed for him going forward. Dr. Rare. Ellison submitted a statement to the court confirming the testing history and his own concerns. The records from his office were entered as evidence. The family court judge was a woman in her 60s with a reputation for precision, and she did not seem interested in Nathan's explanations. The sole medical decision-making petition he had been preparing became, in court, evidence of premeditation. His own attorney looked uncomfortable. Nathan was not criminally charged. The tests had not caused Connor harm, and the law in our state requires a fairly specific threshold for that. But the family court findings were damning. He lost the ability to make unilateral medical decisions for Connor. He was required to attend a court-supervised co-parenting program. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. There were things that happened with Gwen that I want to be careful how I describe, because she was also, in some ways, a person Nathan had deceived. She had believed, apparently, that Nathan was separated. She had not known the full shape of what he was doing with Connor's medical records. When she found out through her own attorney during discovery, she stopped communicating with Nathan entirely. Miles, I later learned through a mutual legal channel, eventually found a donor match through the National Registry. He had a transplant the following spring. I think about that little boy sometimes. I hope he's okay. I do. That part of this was never his fault. I want to say something about the 6 years I spent not asking questions, because I think it's the part of this that I most need other people to hear. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't weak. I was in love with someone who had identified, very early on, that I trusted easily and was grateful to be taken care of. He had built a dynamic in our home that made my involvement feel unnecessary, even slightly intrusive. You'd just end up confused. I have a relationship with the doctor. Small phrases, delivered with confidence over years, that quietly carved out a space where I had no standing. If your partner consistently removes you from decisions about your own children, not occasionally, not because of logistics, but as a pattern, that is not helpfulness. That is architecture. It is the deliberate construction of a structure in which you have no role, so that when something needs to happen without your knowledge, the scaffolding is already in place. Connor is 9 now. He's doing well. He knows that his dad and I don't live together anymore, and he knows he has a half-brother, because we told him in the gentlest way we could, with the help of his therapist, and because he deserved to know the truth about his own family. Last month, I took Connor to his annual checkup myself. I sat in the exam room the whole time. I asked questions. Dr. Ellison handed me a printed copy of his updated records without my even having to ask. On the way out, Connor took a sticker from the basket by the door, a green dinosaur, and pressed it to the back of my hand while we waited for the elevator. Good checkup, he said. Yeah, I said. Good checkup. I held his hand the whole way to the car. I didn't let go. The sticker Connor pressed onto the back of my hand that afternoon, a green dinosaur, slightly crooked, is still somewhere in my coat pocket. I haven't thrown it away. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because it was the first medical appointment in 7 years where I was just his mother, present and uninstructed, and nothing about that felt small to me. I've thought a lot about how things like this happen. Not the dramatic version, not the villain with a plan. The quieter version, how a person can be steadily, gently moved to the edges of their own life without ever feeling a single hard push. Nathan never yelled at me. He never forbade me from anything, not in words. He just made himself the expert, the necessary one, the one who had the relationship with the doctor and understood the medical side. He did it so consistently and with such apparent care that I mistook the architecture for affection. That's the part I keep returning to. Not his betrayal, though it was a betrayal. Absolutely. but my own long habit of not asking questions. I was intelligent enough to know something was unusual. I had moments, small ones, where something felt slightly off, but I had also been trained, very gradually, to distrust my own instincts in favor of his competence. That training didn't happen overnight. It happened in small increments, one you'd just be confused at a time, until I had quietly handed over the most important things without realizing I'd let go. What I've come to understand is that clarity isn't something that just arrives. It requires practice. It requires the willingness to ask the question even when you've been made to feel the question is unnecessary, even when asking feels like an accusation, even when the person across from you is very good at making you feel small for wondering. Asking is not distrust. Asking is how a person stays present in their own life. And then there's the question of what you do once you know. That part tested something in me I didn't fully know I had. When I sat on the floor of Nathan's office holding that legal memo, the one outlining how to remove me from my son's medical decisions before I ever found out the truth, I had a choice. I could panic. I could confront him immediately and hand him the advantage. Or I could get very still, think very clearly, and do what needed to be done in the right order. I chose the second thing. Not because I'm particularly brave, but because Connor was asleep down the hall, and being his mother required me to be steady. That's what I want anyone who is in something like this to hear. Not that you need to be extraordinary, not that you have to be someone you're not, but that when the moment comes, and sometimes it does come, the steadiness is already in you. It was there in me long before I knew I'd need it. It had just never been asked for in that particular way. Nathan made choices that caused real harm. Miles, his other son, was genuinely sick and needed help, and that part of the story carries its own weight of sadness. But the answer to a child being sick is honesty. It is asking the other parent. It is trusting that love, even complicated love, can make room for hard conversations. What Nathan chose instead, the secrecy, the testing, the legal contingency plans, those choices had a cost. Not a cosmic one, not some abstract punishment. Just the simple, grinding cost of what happens when the truth eventually surfaces, as it always does, and the scaffolding you built to contain it comes down all at once. Connor is 9. He knows he has a half-brother. He asked me recently if Miles was okay, and I told him I believe so. He nodded and went back to his cereal. Children are more capable of holding complexity than we give them credit for. We are the ones who complicate it. I hold his hand tighter now. That part is different. That part I don't think will ever go back.